QSO Today, episode 297, Sam Birnbaum, W2JDB. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you to check out the new IC705 all-band portable transceiver. More on this later. And by QRP Labs, makers of the popular QCX kit transceiver and a whole host of parts and kits for the radio amateur. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. I announced last week that I'm creating a virtual ham radio expo that is tentatively scheduled for June 18, 2020. Over 40 of the previous QSO Today guests have agreed to speak, and we are working out the details now. The goal is to get as close to a real ham radio convention as possible while making it accessible to as many hams around the world as possible. To make this a success, I will need your help. Please stay tuned for more information. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth4Z1UG, your host. My guest this week is Sam Birnbaum, W2JDB, who could have been a long-time ham at this point, but did not officially join our ranks until after his retirement. Sam's background in computer science and programming led him to first develop a software logging program called QLog for operating and logging the digital modes more easily while doing national parks on the air. Of course, now QLog does a whole lot more. I will let W2JDB tell you the rest of his amazing story in this QSO Today. W2JDB, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Sam?
Yes, I am. This is W2JDB.
Sam, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your story, your ham radio story? When and where did it start for you?
Well, it started when I was 16, but unfortunately I couldn't learn Morse code, so I was strictly a shortwave listener. Got married at 20, forgot about radios, and life got in the way. In 2014, I found out, after I retired, 2014, I found out that they did away with the requirements for code. I found out by accident. I found a local club, went there on a Wednesday meeting, introduced myself, started studying for the tests. 3 months later, I took the 3 tests on a Saturday, got my extra license, bought a radio, built an anon with the help from the members of the club. They showed me how an anon has to be wound. Put together a vertical using a copper tubing, plumbing copper tubing, a 35-foot vertical, about 14 inches off the side of the house with 4 radials, and went on the air. And that was the beginning of my ham radio.
Okay, but the listeners know me very well, and that is that we can't stop here. We could close the program now because you've just given me the whole program. So we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to go back. I want to know, when you were 16 years old, what was it about radio and electronics that caused you to be fascinated by it?
I always liked to build things. I was always interested in that, and it was just something that I took a look at. I said, "Wow, I can listen to the whole world," and it was very, very interesting. So I built my first radio, Night Kid Star Roma. Ended up building 2 other radios, one for a friend, and the Night Kid R100A. I just enjoyed it, and that was it. Learning new things.
And did that interest in electronics and radio, did that come from anybody in the family? Was there something that happened that kind of ignited that interest?
No, not really. My dad was a watchmaker. He taught me how to fix watches when I was 8 years old. So I've just, I gravitated to building things. That was it. It had nothing to do with radios or anything else.
Now, you told me when we first started that you, in fact, were born in Tel Aviv, and so that potentially you could be drafted by the Israeli army, even still. Now, I think you're past the age, and that's okay. So what was the story there? You were born when in Tel Aviv, and how did you end up in the States?
I was born in Tel Aviv in 1951. The reason why I ended up in the States is because my parents, who emigrated to Israel after World War II, my mom did not see her brothers for 15 years, and they wanted to see her. And so they sent her a ticket, and my dad decided to take us all to the States. If we liked it, we'd stay there. If not, we'll all go back. And we stayed there. And that's the story. And
where did you land in the States? Yeah.
We landed in what is now currently JFK after 24 hours in the air because every place we went there was a snowstorm, so they kept flying us from city to city in Europe until we finally made it one day before the visa expired.
Oh, that's amazing. I remember as a kid that somehow Bangor, Maine was always like the step off to Europe. I mean, if you were flying to Europe in a DC-3 or something, that you'd fly from, say, New York to Bangor and then off to London or something like that. Was that kind of the route?
No, actually, we flew on KLM from Lod at the time. It wasn't Ben Gurion, but it was Lod. And we flew to Rome, and we were supposed to go from Rome to Munich. Munich was snowed in, so they flew us into Amsterdam, and I believe it was Amsterdam. I was only 11 years old, so I really don't know. All I know is that every place we stopped, we ate. They kept giving us food because there was a layover. And then from there, we head back to Munich, and I don't remember from where else from Munich, and then we ended up going to JFK, and that was it. So we were about 23 hours in the air, on ground and air, for what should have been maybe a 14-hour flight.
Well, right now you and I are talking during the COVID-19 virus, but when everything's normal, I let the listeners know that I can fly from Tel Aviv now to San Francisco in 16 hours nonstop. It's an amazing thing, hurtling through space in an aluminum tube at 500 miles an hour.
Yes.
So here you are, you're a young man, you have an interest in electronics, you're building radios for friends. Did you decide to make a career of electronics and radio as part of that? Is that the direction that you took for your education and career?
Well, when I went to college, I did take electrical engineering. However, I dropped out, got married when I was 20 years old, and it actually I ended up learning programming instead, and I got to be a programmer at age 22.
And what programming languages did you learn, and what kind of computers were you on in those days?
Well, I learned multiple languages, but the language that I finally got a job in, the language that was used was RPG2 on a System 3 Model 10, and that was 1974.
And a System 3 Model 10 was a IBM system, right?
That is correct.
And you did your programming originally on cards?
Punch cards, fed into a computer, which was the size, I would say, of a small refrigerator with 10 megabytes of disk space, about five of them removable, 5 fixed, and 16K of memory.
Those are amazing times. I think that was the reason I didn't go into computers, was the lack of satisfaction that you got from punching your cards and putting them in the machine and then going for coffee for an hour and a half because you had to wait till your job was finished, and then you come back and you found out that you had an error on one of the cards and you had to do the whole thing over. There just wasn't enough feedback for me, but it seemed to me that for you that actually seemed to work out okay. How long did you spend in the computer business?
I stayed in the software development for over about 40 years.
Are there any notable projects that you might have worked on in software development?
Yes, I did a lot. The last few years, last 20 years in my career in software was in the analytics, working on Wall Street, and I learned a lot about math and statistics. And sometimes you have to take a look beyond what the numbers tell you to understand that sometimes numbers lie. And it was very, very interesting. I got a real good education. People ask me, where did you go to college? And I say, ULE. And they look at me with very perplexed. I said, never heard of that place. I said, that's University of Life Experience. And that you learn a lot more through that than through anything you get in the classroom.
I happen to believe that's true as well. And what programming languages were you using in the last years of your career?
I used multiples. I used, when the PC really came into being, there was a company called ANZA, which came out with Paradox, a product called Paradox. So I used their language. I used the Perl. I used COBOL. Lastly, I used to use Pascal, Object Pascal. I also used a little bit of C, C++, but mostly Object Pascal.
And do you find that most programming languages are kind of the same?
The thought behind them, the ideas behind them, the imagination is always the same. The syntax is different, and some languages are more appropriate for certain things than others. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, you may want to choose a different language, but the language itself is just a means to an end.
So you're a relatively recent ham radio operator. Is there anything from your career, 40 years as a programmer, as a creator of software programs and projects, that you bring into amateur radio that really enhances the hobby that we all love?
Well, it enhances it for myself and some of my friends. I don't know if it enhances the hobby as a whole, although I did enhance it for a group of people who happen to be visually impaired. But my ability to use software as a means of a tool to develop things allowed me to integrate the software that I developed with my radios. I have 3 radios. I have TS590S from Kenwood. I have a FT857 from Yaesu and an FT817 from Yaesu. And what I was able to do is actually allow my program, integrated my program and control the radios and track the radios.
Let's talk about that in just a minute. Let's go back to your shack. You've got the TS590S, which is a very nice 160 through 10 meter, maybe 160 through 6 meter transceiver, HF transceiver?
Correct.
That's made by Kenwood. And then you've got the 857, 817. Are you a QRP operator? Do you like to take the radios into the field?
Yes, I do. And actually, that was the beginning of my software development for myself and for my friends. It actually was the impetus behind the program that I wrote.
And where do you like to take the radios? You told me that you're on Long Island, on the Atlantic side of the island. Where do you like to take the radios?
Various parks, sometimes to the beach. If you go on my QRZ page, you'll find me sitting on the beach talking on the radio. That was a trip that I took with my friend, who I introduced to portable operation, another ham friend of mine.
What does your portable system look like? What do you take out there to the beach besides the radios?
Homebrewed vertical that I developed, that I built with a coil-loaded, bottom-loaded coil that I built myself on a tripod. I also had a magnetic loop that I built. I found that the vertical was a little bit more portable than the copper pipe mag loop that I built.
Oh, I would think so. You might have a hard time getting a 1 meter loop into the car, right?
Well, it's not that bad. It's only a 36-inch in diameter, so it's not that bad. But it's just heavier than a vertical than a whip that you can just pull up.
And that magnetic loop antenna, does it have a big capacitor at the bottom? Are you actually running 100 watts into the antenna?
You probably run 100 watts into it, although I wouldn't recommend getting anywhere near or even touching anywhere near it because there's a huge voltage in that capacitor. But yeah, the capacitor itself is that I put into it is large enough that it can handle the voltage of 100 watts.
And why did you choose the Kenwood TS590S as a transceiver?
Basically, on a recommendation of the guys in the club that I belong to. They said it, and they say if there's anything that goes wrong, they can help me with it or can teach me about it. Didn't take me too long to learn it. I think the ergonomics on it are really, really easy to learn. And so it was a solid radio. A few of them in the club had it, and they recommended it, so I went based upon the recommendation.
Now, we have the video running right now, and you have a mirror that's behind you, and it reflects right into your operating station. Is that a power amplifier that you've got there on the side there, or is that a big antenna tuner?
No, it is an amplifier. It's an ACOM 1200S. There is another tuner next to it, which is a Dentron. It's a standby tuner. I don't use it. It was a standby tuner. The actual tuner for this particular amplifier is an ACOM 04A. It is actually mounted at the base of the vertical antenna, the 43-foot vertical antenna that I have outside the house, and the amplifier actually talks to it. It controls the tuner, and the tuner gives it feedback. So everything is automated over here. The amplifier follows the radio, the tuner follows the amplifier, and they all talk to each other. When it works like a charm. When it fails, then you got a problem.
And why would it fail in an amazing place that you're in?
It's electronics.
Oh, it's electronics.
There's software, electronics. When I purchased this whole thing, I was on the bleeding edge, as they call it in software. And that means that you're one of the first few, and there's some software bugs or glitches in the microcode, and you you call them up and you say, there's a problem over here. And they found a few problems. I was basically debugging some of their own software, some of ACOM software. It is what it is. when you were the first one that does, one of the first few that uses a solid state amplifier with a brand new, just released software controlled tuner, then you have to accept the consequences.
And now this message from ICOM America. Get outside and be active with ICOM's new IC705 HF to UHF portable transceiver and its optional multifunction backpack. This is ICOM's perfect solution for SOTA and parks on the air. The ICOM IC705 is your perfect QRP companion with its base station features and functionality at the tips of your fingers in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. This compact rig weighs in at 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds. This beautiful new rig has RF direct sampling for most of the HF band and IF sampling for frequencies above 25 megahertz, and includes a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen with a live band scope and waterfall display. The ICOM IC705 will be the replacement and amazing 21st century baseband rig for microwave DXers, rovers, and contesters, and the operating choice for those under the new S-HAIL geosynchronous satellite footprint. Unbelievable. The radio is 5 watts with its internal battery and 10 watts with an external 13.8 volt power supply. This full-featured radio operates on single sideband CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functions. Included in this package is a micro USB connector, Bluetooth to support linking to your smartphone or Bluetooth headset, built-in Wi-Fi, integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger, micro SD card slot, and the HM243 speaker microphone, which is standard equipment. The perfect accessory for the IC705 is the optional backpack, the LC192, with a special compartment for your IC705 with plenty of room for antennas, cables, and other gear to get you on the air from the mountaintop or the local park. There is a link to this amazing new rig on the QSO Today podcast website for this episode, and when you order your new ICOM IC705 from your favorite ham radio dealer, be sure to tell them that you heard about it here on QSO Today. My thanks to ICOM America for their continued support of the QSO Today podcast. And now back to our QSO Today. What does a radial field look like underneath that 43-foot vertical? What do you have there?
Just 4 radials. I don't have that much property. The property is only 90 by 70. Most of it is my house.
They're just going wherever they can go in order to be spread out.
Correct.
And that's why the tuner at the bottom is really helpful, I would imagine, right?
Correct. There's very little RFI coming back into the shack, and there's very little loss in the coax, although the coax is not that long. It's about maybe 40 some odd, maybe 50 feet of coax between the amplifier and the tuner.
Now, are you a contester?
No, I'm not.
Do you like to work DX?
I do like working DX. I have 173 countries in the log, 140 some odd confirmed across the bands. Mixed mode, mostly in phone. I did do FT8 when it first came out, which was another part of the project. Software, I was able to actually connect my software directly to WSJTX and control it and let it control me to some extent. And but like I said, I do enjoy working DX. I also enjoy rack chewing.
And where do you like to rack chew?
Most of my rack chewing happens to be on 2 meters with a local group over here. So once in a while, I'm able to find someone who likes to talk, and we have a nice conversation. It's hit or miss. It's a hobby.
Do you operate AM at night on, say, 80 meters or anything like that?
No, I do not. I've gotten to that point yet.
Now, you mentioned that you operate FT8, or you operate FT8 for the purpose of your project. Let's talk a little bit about the project. The project that we're talking about, and it's the reason that Rich Swerko recommended that I speak with you, is you created a software project called QLog. What is QLog, and how did that really start for you?
Well, as I mentioned before, QLog was really started because I was doing a lot of portable operation. And I was going out to the field and coming home at night, and I had these 50 pieces of paper where I had all my contacts on. And I got sick and tired of actually taking those pieces of paper, putting it into QRZ, and making mistakes. So I wrote a very little program that allowed me to take a little, what we would call a notebook, and just type in all the call signs and contacts and names and everything, dates and times, whatever. go back to the house, upload it to QRZ, and I didn't have to worry about the papers. And my friend, Gary, K2GK, said, that would be great, but you know what would be great? I said, what? If it could follow the radio. And that's where QLog started. So now I started building the program to follow the 590, learn how to do that. Then I took the 817, which he had, and I made it follow that. Then I took the 857 that I had and made it follow that. And that's when it started. That's how QLog started. So it has, then I said, well, if it has that, then I put in the DX cluster, and I put in a whole bunch of other stuff, weight monitored, controlled the radio, and that was the beginning of QLog.
Do you get hooks from QRZ? Meaning, if you have a call sign, do you actually go to QRZ and pull data out of their database in order to fill out the rest of the contact, if you'd like?
Yes, correct. It does. Not only does it fill it out, but then it also uploads it. When you finish the QSO and you say click save, it actually uploads it to QRZ. And if you belong to QLog, it'll upload it to QLog. And if you belong to EQSL, it'll upload it to EQSL. All at the same time.
So QLog actually has some really kind of amazing features, because it seems to me that sometimes the problem that people have with electronic logs, or at least when I look at electronic logs, is that I want it to upload to QRZ, but I also want it to upload to Logbook of the World, and I just want it to be automatic. I don't want to export files and import files and all that stuff. Have you kind of gotten QLog to do all that stuff without having to really make a chore out of it?
Yes. The only place that I did not upload automatically is Log of the World. And the reason for that is that Log of the World does not have a capability to actually edit an erroneously uploaded entry. So if you upload something and you want to correct it, it basically creates another entry. I have not found a way for me to correct or delete an entry. And I actually talked to someone within ARRL about that missing capability.
Well, maybe they'll ask you to come and actually clean it up for them. You never can tell, right?
No, it's okay. I'll let somebody else do that. I have enough on my plate.
Something else happened with QLog. Do you want to talk about how QLog now evolved into a different area? Or maybe it's the same area, but it has an enhanced benefit.
In 2017, when FT8 came out, I enhanced my program so it interfaces directly to WSJTX, so I can work FT8, because it was, as my friend said, the next biggest thing. And under the current propagations, it was but the only thing that we can get out to certain places. So I did that. And then in 2018, December 2018, Rich, K1HTV, I believe that's call sign is, he put out a email requesting someone to help visually impaired hams using a WSJTX. Now, I already had two of the components already built into it. One was I had text to audio built into my program because I got sick and tired of calling my call sign all the time. So I just put something in my program. So I push a button, I click on a button, and it'll actually send out my call sign phonetically through the radio. So I don't have to do that. And if I wanted to call CQ, I have something else that can call CQ at the same time. I can record anything and send it to the radio. So I had that function. I had the function of connecting to WSJTX. So I volunteered, and I sent them an email offline, tell them I'm more than happy to help you guys out. He came back to me about a week later and said, okay, let me have your program and let me play with it. So I sent him my program. He played with it a little bit, and we talked about what I can do. So initially, I put in the audio for blind hams to reply to CQs. Now, the program has a whole bunch of filters. It also has a function that says auto reply. Now, the auto reply is not a robot, but it allows you to reply to a station calling CQ once it passes a set of filters. If it passes those set of filters, it'll automatically reply as though you double-clicked on a line in WSJTX. And that's how it started. And then we went from there. It evolved to calling CQ and calling a particular station, and a whole other set of filters that I built in for them. Basically, a visually impaired or a blind ham can use WSJTX without a screen reader and have all the functionalities plus of a sighted ham.
For those of us with sight, we see a waterfall display, or at least that's how we might find the FT8 area. We know where it's supposed to be, but we have that benefit. What does a blind ham experience with your program with QLog?
Well, once he starts up QLog and he hits one of the hotkeys that tells him, there's a whole bunch of hotkeys that I built into this thing. It actually it allows the blind ham to let QLog start up WSJTX, and it'll actually tell him that if WSJTX is not running, it says, "You want me to start WSJTX?" And it'll start it up with a predefined configuration for him or her. And whatever the band is on, the function keys that I built in there allows them to bounce to the band button, to the band selector in WSJTX. It actually tells them what band WSJTX is working, what frequency they're on, what mode they're on. So it tells them all that information through audio. Once it does that, it tells them that it's ready to either auto reply, call CQ, or call a station. So they can press any one of those keys, and it'll actually tell them, if they're replying, it'll tell them what station it's replying to, what country they're in, and what grid they're in. When they receive the reply, it'll tell them what the signal-to-noise ratio that they received and what signal-to-noise ratio it's sending back to them. It'll tell you what if you're receiving an RRR or RR73, and it'll tell you that you're sending back a 73, and it'll tell you that it's logging and posting to QRZ, and it's posting to QLog optionally, and it's optionally posting to EQSL. And then it'll wait and make sure that the station that you just finished the QSL with actually doesn't send you back another RRR or RR73 because it didn't receive your 73. If it sends you another RRR or an RR73, you'll automatically resend. QLog will automatically tell WSJTX to resend that last 73.
The experience then with FT8 is that if their station's calling, they actually hear the call sign of the station calling, and they can decide by pushing a button whether they want to reply to that?
No, not necessarily. What it does is, if you have auto reply, it said the first station that passes the filter, that's the station that gets replied to. Okay, so you have I want to only work stations that I never worked before. But however, if I've worked them before, but it's a different band or a different mode, I'll work them on a different band or a different mode. So if you're working FT8, but then you switch to FT4, well, I answer them on FT8, but I can answer them on FT4, even though it's on the same band. It also has to pass a filter, if they want to, that they use log of the world. Or they're strictly DX, in other words, audio country code. Or they have a signal-to-noise ratio that is better than whatever number that you set. It's all user-controlled. Or that the time differential, the time difference is better than a second and a half, let's say. So it has to pass any one of those optional filters that the user can set. At that point in time, it'll reply. Now, it'll reply, and if after the third attempt to get a response from that station, it doesn't receive a response, it'll automatically shift the frequency by 25 hertz, not the frequency, but the offset by 25 hertz, either down or up, depending upon where you are in the bandpass. When you're calling CQ, you obviously don't want to create QRM. So you have to find an open spot on the bandpass. Well, for a sighted individual, they'll take a look at the bandpass, they'll try to figure out where they can find something, and they'll place it there. It's kind of tough for a blind or visually impaired ham who can't see it. So I built in a function to analyze the bandpass. It'll find an open spot. It'll try to find a minimum of 25 hertz. This way, even if it has to overlap by 12 or 13 hertz to either side, you will get decoded without creating QRM. So what it'll do is it'll listen for approximately a minute and 20 seconds to make sure you have at least 5 cycles, 15-second cycles in there, to analyze the bandpass. And then it will shift it to an open spot, wait for the next cycle to decode it and tell you that it was successful, and then you can call CQ. And then you can obviously have an ability to say, I only call CQ DX, I want to call CQ Europe, I want to call CQ Oceania, all those things that you can specify, and it'll actually call CQ for you. It'll tell you that it's calling CQ. It'll tell you when someone replies to you. It'll tell you if someone replies to you, it'll tell them what the station is phonetically, what the grid, what country. It'll tell you what the signal-to-noise ratio you're sending back. It'll tell you what the signal-to-noise ratio that you received. And then it will tell you that you're sending an RRR. It will always send an RRR. And it'll wait for a 73. And as soon as it receives a 73, it'll log it, post it to QLog, QLog, and EQSL. All with audio.
Hey, this is Eric for just another short break. One of my favorite ham radio podcasts is the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, hosted by George, KJ6VU, my guest in episode 232, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ. George and Jeremy take a bi-weekly deep dive into their favorite Ham Radio Workbench projects and the technologies that fascinate them. If you want to be a ham radio builder or just be inspired, click on the link in this week's show notes page.
Can a blind ham work a pileup, like a DX entity that everyone wants?
Yes. They can work Fox and Hounds. They can work RTTY Roundup. They can work North America VHF, UHF. All the contents, all the special operations that are enabled inside WSATX, the blind ham can work.
So the rules for those contests or for working those DX stations is in WSJTX and not in QLog, right?
That's correct.
What is the voice of QLog? Is that you?
No.
No?
It's you. Depending on the voices that you have within Windows, you have either, if we have Windows 10, it's either David or Zira. And you can control the pitch and you can control the speed.
Very interesting. I'm running KDE Linux on my desktop here. What?
Well, if you're not running Windows, my program won't work.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. So I'd have to use an emulator or something like that.
The Windows-only program, that was the area.
Oh, Sam, what can I tell you? Okay.
You can run Windows emulation.
I've interviewed a number of blind hams, and they seem to favor the Kenwood radios. And I thought when you first mentioned that you have the Kenwood 590S, that the reason that you favored it is because blind hams favor it, because they say that the radio itself seems to be more user-friendly to blind hams. Do you find that's true, and have you used QLog with other brands besides the Yaesu?
Yes, my friend had a ICOM 7300, and he wanted to use my program with the 7300, including the read control. So I programmed it to use the 7300 as well. I don't use third-party libraries for the read control. I wrote my own code. I optimized the code to minimize the amount of CPU cycles that are needed. I don't do any polling on the radios. The only radios that I needed to do polling to some extent, minimal, is the ICOM 7300, the FT, the 817 and 857. The Kenwood series had an ability to actually tell it to set a parameter in there to say anytime the status of the radio changes, send a message to the program. So I don't do any polling at all. It reads the radio continuously as the radio changes its status. So it's a very, very efficient way of doing it.
What's QLog missing right now?
At some point, I was going to say that QLog, I was going to put actually voice control. Now, there's voice feedback, but there's no voice control. So one of the things I'm playing around with is actually allowing to say, switch the frequency this or switch the frequency that. But after playing around with it for a little bit, I decided it's just not worth it.
That could open up the door to another group of hams with disabilities that perhaps they could have full control of the rig.
I agree with you. I found it that some of the things that I have to do kind of opens up a couple of holes that I have not yet been able to get around. And you're talking about other people with some challenges, I will call. One of the blind hams, Mike, W6K QUV, I believe his call sign, he's not only blind, but he's only got one hand. And he's managed to have to do DXCC, and FT8, and well over 1,000 QSLs using QLog. There are three members.
Yeah, you should feel pretty good about that, being able to enable another ham to be able to take full advantage of the equipment that he's got.
Yeah, no, I happen to agree with you on that thing. The satisfaction of giving back something to the community is immense. That's the thing that really, really gives me the satisfaction is hearing those guys on a Tuesday night when we go into a conference call saying, Sam, I can't believe how great this is. It's fantastic because they can use the radios, and whether it's a Kenwood or anything else, they can at least use it. The nice thing about it is that I don't have to control the radio while our WSJTX is actually controlling it. So that requirement is removed.
Now, is QLog open source so that perhaps a community could enhance it?
It is not. The reason for it is because I use commercial components, which I cannot open source anyway.
So libraries and other components that you have to pay for? Correct.
Yeah, it's a commercial product. The development environment was Delphi, currently by Embarcadero, originally by Boland. I can't open source it.
If a blind ham comes to you and says, I've got a XX radio that's not on the list, how big a project is that to interface QLog to a radio that's not on the list?
That all depends on the radio. I would have to have the radio over here to play around with. So if you're willing to ship me the radio, I'll be more than willing to try.
There's a standard, I think they called it CAT, right? Is that a standard that you adhere to in terms of communications with rigs?
Well, if you take a look at the computer, the CAT is actually for computer access, computer control of the radio. But Kenwood has a different set. ICAM had a different set, and the old Yaesus had a different set. A lot of them have migrated to the way that Kenwood has done. Which I happen to think is probably the neatest way from a programming standard. It's neat. Flex Radio has basically the same command plus structure of the Kenwood. I mean, it's more extensive, but it has the command structure, which is much easier to program than ICOM or Yaesu or the old style Yaesu. But it isn't that bad because the control that I have is minimal. I don't try to control the 10,000 plus things that a radio can do. I just try to control the core components that allow you to control the frequency, control noise reduction, control the volume, control the band, and transmit or receive. Which VFO is active, which VFO is in the background.
And does it have also control perhaps of station accessories like antenna rotators and power amplifiers, things like this?
No.
Any plans for that?
The only plans I have right now is to control the ACOM 1200S, which has CAT commands built into it, or control program to built into it. That's the only one that I'm going to try to build in for it. So I can, when I have the radio on, if I want to turn on the amplifier from standby to operate, I don't have to reach over to the amplifier and turn it on to go to switch. Or if I'm not doing anything, I'm just listening for the last 5 minutes, let my program automatically switch the amplifier from standby, from operate to standby.
Can QLog work in a network? Let's say you have a field day operation. You want to include blind hams in your field day operation. Can QLog be networked and operated by multiple users to a single database?
It currently is not. Since it wasn't made for that purpose, I didn't see a need for it.
Sam, you have a video on YouTube of using FT8 with QLog. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
There's I created a YouTube. I'm not a videographer. I don't do that kind of stuff for a living. I happen to find something that allowed me to record the screen, and the actual voice that you will hear is not mine.
Is that right? Why not?
Because I allowed David, the voice from Windows, to actually introduce QLog as a blind ham would hear it. And what you'll be hearing if you go on YouTube and you search W2JDB on YouTube,
right,
you'll find a video, and the introduction is by David, the voice of Windows. Everything you hear is a live session of FT8, 26 minutes worth of FT8, replying to a CQ, calling CQ and trying to call a station. And all the voices that you will hear is what a blind or visually impaired ham would hear. You can actually literally turn off your monitor. After you see the screen, you will actually turn off the monitor and listen to it. And that's it. A friend of mine, when he was working downstairs in his basement on his workshop, said he used to put on QLog and his radio, put it on auto reply or call CQ, go back to his workbench, and when he heard the fact that it finished the QSO, he went back and pressed the button and started all over again. He didn't have to look at it.
Do you use QLog yourself when you're
all the time
with the audio running, just like you were a blind ham?
With the audio running, I do not use it. I don't need it because I'm facing the radio itself all the time, so I don't find that I need it. If I had the situation where I had to walk away, I may do that, but I really don't. I don't play FT8 that much. I mean, in the beginning, I was on FT8 a lot. It was a novelty. As a good friend of mine, Jerry K2GV said, it's like crack cocaine. Once you get hooked on it, you couldn't stop. I mean, I got another one. Oh my God. I mean, you're going crazy. But after I learned all the tricks of how to get the QSO, how to do things, and because I developed stuff for it, I understood what was the best thing for it. For instance, the shifting up and down after 3 shots. And I did this thing, and the reason why I did that thing for the blind is I used to do it for myself. I always try to transmit, and I know this is some people will say, why are you doing that? You're causing QRM. I always transmit, when someone calls CQ, when you double click on that line, you will automatically shift your frequency to his TX frequency. I allow that to happen for 3 cycles. On the 4th cycle, if I'm below 1250, I will shift up 25 hertz. If I'm above 1250, I'll shift down 25 hertz. And I look at it and say, why do you always transmit on his calling frequency? And I answered someone, I said, why did you pick that offset frequency? You picked that offset frequency because it's clear to you. I want to transmit something that's clear to you. I have no idea what you're not hearing or what signals you're hearing on your side. So I'm sending stuff directly to you. Now, if you have more than one person sending on your TX frequency, one of the signals is going to be stronger than others. One of them. That frequency, that particular one will get answered immediately. That will cause the other ones to be disabled. So I'm no longer causing QRM. If all our signal strength are the same, then none of us will get decoded. Someone else sending off other places will get decoded. In which case, I'll still get disabled and I'm still not causing QRM. But if everybody has the notion of sending on other frequencies and I'm the only one that's sending on this frequency, I'm going to get decoded. And within the 25 hertz, I will still get disabled if he's answering someone else. And that's the logic that I use for the blind group. And it works.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. QRP Labs. And now back to our QSO Today. Tell me a little bit about the Ham Radio Club that you joined. What do you think is its most amazing feature?
The radio club is NASA Amateur Radio Club. It's located in Long Island. It's actually headquarters right now in the Lennon House in Eisenhower Park. It's not a big club, but it's not a really small club. It's about close to 40 members in it. I think its greatest attributes is that it's a very, very active club with building things. It's not just listening, but it actually builds. They do a lot of building, a lot of experimentation, building antennas, onons, the whole bit, and really good elements in it as far as people becoming more technically proficient in the radio itself. That's what I found on this club versus some other clubs that I've heard about.
Do you have a ham radio workbench?
At a house?
Yeah. Do you build stuff?
I have a soldering station. I have an antenna analyzer. I have a VOM. I have other stuff. I do not have an oscilloscope. I don't have SMD soldering station with hot air. I don't have that capabilities.
You're a software guy.
Exactly.
You're a software guy, not a hardware guy.
But I do like to tinker with the hardware. Like I said, I like to tinker. I like to build things.
Have you done anything with Arduinos or Raspberry Pis?
No, that's something that I would like to get into.
Were you involved in National Parks on the Air?
Yes, I was. Actually, my friend and I, a couple of friends and I, actually went and activated quite a few number of parks. And one of the highlights was activating the White House. I went with a group of 8 people and activated the White House. Not the actual White House itself, but the park next to it. It was a very, very interesting experience, especially when the Secret Service agents came around to try to figure out, to make sure that we weren't trying to blow up the White House.
I think people forget that the White House is one of the national parks itself. Now, where did you operate? Maybe operating on the South Lawn, or were you actually inside the national park?
No. There's a huge park a couple of 100 yards away from the White House, far enough that there was no problems at all. But still, the Secret Service agents came around, make sure that everything was okay. We got very friendly with them, and they understood what we were doing. But they kept an eye on us, and we had a great time. We had a lot of people come over, asked us what we were doing over there. As a matter of fact, President Barack Obama actually took off from the helicopter, and we watched him as the 2 helicopters took off from the White House. It was interesting. It was a really, really interesting trip going to Washington, D.C., and sweltering in the summer.
When you operate on the beach and when you operate in the national parks, do you actually take along some kind of a card or something like that to give to non-hams to kind of give them a sense of what you're doing and also how they could follow up?
Yes, we did take. We took some cards, some information, sheets basically that we printed up to pass, especially when we did the Washington D.C. Trip to the White House. But when you go to the beach, it's really you're on there for yourself, for self-enjoyment, being in the sunshine and the relaxing and listening. And surprisingly, on the beach, very few people come over. They just keep walking back and forth, in their own world. Once in a while, you get one, what are you doing? The funniest part is when the guys go on the beach with their jackeye poles, which are 33 feet long, and they use them as a vertical, and the guy looks at them and says, what are you doing? And some of the guys say, well, we're fishing.
Right, we're fishing for contacts. I think that the National Parks on the Air was such a successful program that the people who participated in it are just wanting more. I'm just wondering, for you, what would be more? What would you do without National Parks on the Air? What do you think the next National Parks on the Air should be?
I'm trying to think of the this is a kind of a chase, as you call it, to find that people will be really interested. I know that they try to do with this grid square, chasing the grid squares of FT8. I did not participate in that. Some of my friends did. Anything that has to do with going outdoors, something similar to that. I don't know if it's parks on the air or
Are there little islands off of Long Island that you could do islands on the air?
No, not really. I wish there were, but not really.
A sandy shoal or something?
Because of the international IOTAs, there are only so many islands, and you can't make them so small that people will go, oh, I moved 10 feet, I'm on another island. So it just doesn't work. I have no idea. I really don't know. I'm not that good at coming up with that kind of stuff. So I don't know.
Do you have other hobbies? Do you still write software for fun for other kinds of things? Is your house automated and home automation, all that stuff?
No. After 40 some odd years of writing software, I really did. It really is. There's not much that I can think of that I want to write. I'm not trying to make money off of this thing. This is giving out freely. If there comes up to anything that I find interesting, I'll try to write something for it. If my friends come up, Sam, can you do this? I'll say I'll take a look and see if I can do it. I enjoy that kind of stuff. But I enjoy fishing. I enjoy shooting hoops when I get a chance in the sunshine. I enjoy going to the park. I enjoy going to the beach. I enjoy relaxing.
And you're enjoying your retirement with amateur radio, of course.
And that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I enjoy being able, when the time is right, to get on the air and talk to some people. There's some people in countries that that I enjoy contacting them again. Try to keep it a little bit longer than 5-9. Thank you very much. You got, after a while, some of them I've talked to 20 times. Having another 5-9, 5-9, goodbye. It's a little bit, I want to have a little more than conversation.
Well, it's an art form, don't you think?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And you find the words to actually keep the conversation going. Finding how their friends are doing. What would you do last week? What's going on over there? Sometimes you get a guy who just all he wants is the 5-9. And after a while, you say, I'm not going to call him anymore.
You're a new ham radio operator, relatively new. And sometimes when I ask this question in the QSO Today podcast, the question has a lot of history. But you don't have as much history, but it's a good question anyway. And that is, what kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life?
Actually, pretty good. My wife, stay out of my wife's hair.
Well, because all of a sudden you've got a bunch of new equipment that's coming in and being installed, and perhaps that's kind of new to her.
Well, you know what? She knows it's a hobby. She knows it's something that I'm enjoying. And she knows that I try to maintain the perspective of life when it comes to that. I don't need 50 radios. I don't need 50 amplifiers. As I said, it's a hobby, not a life. And I try to keep that in perspective. I enjoyed sailing, but I wasn't let's put it this way. I'm not a fanatic about anything. I enjoy a lot of things. I enjoyed sailing. I enjoy fishing. I enjoy photography. I enjoy this function. I enjoy this. I enjoy that. I don't make it into a life. I just want to enjoy it. I didn't go out on my sailboat when it was 40 miles an hour out in the Sound.
What do you think the greatest challenge is facing amateur radio now?
Getting new blood into the hobby.
Do you have any ideas how you might do that if you wanted to bring younger kids into the hobby?
I'm thinking about going to the local schools and trying to see if I can set some demonstrations about putting a portable radio out there in the field and bringing a class at a time and let them participate and getting a QSO going. Not necessarily as part of an organized school day, but just any time, hey, I have this idea. I'll go from school to school in a local area and say, look, I want to set up a week and allow classes to come down when, instead of just running around in the backyard, maybe talk to and get him on the radio and having to talk to people around the world. The problem is the propagation today is so poor that doing that, they may get bored by not being able to make the contact. So you have to be careful with that, because you can turn them off real quick, and you can probably turn them off much faster than you can turn them on.
Almost all of the blind hams that have been guests on the QSO Today podcast actually got their first start in amateur radio in their blind school. And I'm wondering whether or not with QLog and the things that you've been able to do, and with the blind friends that you have, that you might actually have an into blind schools, if they still exist. I hope they do, where the kids they could learn amateur radio as part of their studies, and QLog actually now helps them to be able to do that so much better. Is that a possibility?
Anything is possible, but I've not been approached like I didn't think of that, and no one has even spoken to me about it.
What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
I guess the development in the digital world, but not so much for the normal contacts. I'm thinking about JS8 call, that the guy developed it. I look at it, and part of my career in software development has always been out of the box thinking. And I'm looking at JS8 call, not so much for the normal use of having a conversation with one amateur radio to another, but in disaster recovery and emergency operations, where you can't get signals out under normal conditions for whatever the reasons are, or you don't have enough power to run power, and yet digital communication can get through. It may be slow because it's got to be synced to have time synced, but you can use that kind of capabilities in emergency communications to get signals out where you normally wouldn't be able to get any kind of communications out. Not only in disaster recovery, but for instance, communicating between airlines that are flying in the air and ground, where they can continuously send stuff out and let ground know exactly where everything is. I don't know if I'm saying it the right way, but communicating where normal communication is almost impossible, where a digital component is more apropos to those kind of things than normal communication.
Well, Sam, I think you sound like you're a ham. This is ham thinking that you're doing right now. So even though your ham radio career is short, you're thinking like a ham. And that is, what can we do with this stuff? What advice would you give to newer returning hams to the hobby?
Don't be afraid to ask questions, which is something that I find is probably the biggest hindrance to anyone coming into anything, is they're afraid to ask questions. There isn't a question that's too dumb or too smart. If you don't know something, ask. There's nothing wrong with asking. There is something wrong if you ask the same questions 4 or 5 times. That's a different story. But it's always good to ask a question, and don't be afraid to try something new. It's always good. If you don't like it, don't, like Mikey. Mikey, try it. If you don't like it, don't eat it. If you try it, you don't like it, then don't use it. It's very simple. But if you do like it, enjoy it.
So the reference to Mikey is the Life cereal commercial that we all enjoyed when we were kids, right?
Exactly.
Well, Sam, this has been a real pleasure for me. I'm really excited about QLog. I'm excited to share QLog with the blind hams that I know, if they don't already know about it, and I hope that if they don't, that they will know about it, and it will get them on the air in a new and unusual way. I'm so grateful that the Ham Radio Service has you as a member. So with that, I want to thank you so much and wish you 73.
73 to you. Stay healthy and stay safe.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Sam. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in W2JDB in the search box at the top of the page. If you'd like to be on the mailing list for the upcoming QSO Today Virtual Ham Radio Expo, please click on the banner in this week's show notes page. Once I have the full brochure, I will send it to you by email. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support for these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages or by using QSO Today in the coupon box at the checkout. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor, monthly or annually, by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 300. QSO Today is now available in iHeartRadio and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use Amazon Echo and say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn."
Special thanks to Ben Bresky, who now edits the audio for this QSO Today podcast from the audio pieces that I give him.
Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.